Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar on the future of international education. Everybody is currently muted. If you'd like to ask a question throughout the webinar, please feel free to do so through the chat function. And now I'll hand it over to our moderator, Dr. Allan Goodman.
Claire, thank you very much, and my thanks really for all of us to the University of California, Davis, Chancellor May, and Joanna Rogolska, the Vice Chancellor, for the idea to have this webinar series and to start with a very international panel. We're also grateful to the more than 500 colleagues from all over the world that are joining us today. The topic is the future, and the problem is about the only safe thing to say about the future right now is that it lies ahead, and that university leadership face really unprecedented challenges. I think if Charles Dickens were moderating this panel, he might say that you couldn't imagine a worse time to be a chancellor or a president, or a better time to be a chancellor or a president, to show the difference that universities and leadership make to the world we share and the world that's emerging. We have a terrific panel this morning, this evening, this afternoon. Their bios are in the notes attached to the information about the website. And what we're going to do is start with just a few basic questions. I'll ask Gary, Louise, and then Fadlo the same question, ask them to make observations about it. We'll have another question or two. And then as you have typed in your questions, Claire will be texting them to me and we'll panel for that kind of discussion. So I'd like to start with maybe the central question for our three presidents. What are you thinking now about the role and responsibility of higher education institutions and international education in times of global crisis like now, and in times that will be in the aftermath of a crisis like this? What are the roles and responsibilities of higher education? We'll start with Gary, and then I invite Louise and then Fadlo for their comment on that question. Gary?
Thank you, Allan. And first, I want to thank you for bringing us together today and for your leadership and partnership at IIE. I also thank President Fresco and President Khuri for joining us as well, and to everyone participating online. You know, as higher education leaders, we need to ensure that we're preparing the next generations to thrive in an increasingly connected world. This is a fundamental goal of the UC Davis strategic plan, to provide an education that addresses the needs and challenges of our changing world. And things are changing rapidly. The challenges keep mounting, but there are two key things to remember, I think. One, we have a shared global responsibility in higher education to fulfill our missions. At UC Davis, we have a tripartite mission of research, teaching, and public service. And all of those are critical as now we conduct groundbreaking research to combat this pandemic and other global challenges. We continue providing world-class learning to our students remotely to ensure their safety and well-being. And finally, we serve our communities through scholarship that's publicly engaged in fields from engineering to law, to social sciences and humanities, and through our UC Davis health system. And also, we have a responsibility to tackle some of today's greatest challenges and opportunities. We must prepare our students to do the same by helping them understand global challenges and inequities to become change makers for our society. And this is especially important as we continue to unfortunately see systemic racism, social injustice, and militarization of police, both locally and globally. Through global learning and international education, students can understand global systems and cultural diversity. In turn, they can take actions that create a more equitable and a more peaceful world. The pandemic also reminds us of how global challenges manifest themselves locally and across borders. There's a critical need for students to develop global skills, knowledge, and sensibilities, all of which make international education more important than ever. We especially see the benefits of global education and global partnerships in the fields of medicine and healthcare. We should further recognize that COVID-19 doesn't respect borders, and it's not going away anytime soon. So students must learn about solutions and the manifestation of diseases and how they take shape in different parts of the world. They also need to learn about healthcare disparities, social determinants of disease, and how to address these challenges. For example, we're seeing African American communities being disproportionately disadvantaged in terms of mortality in the US. The pandemic exposes not only the gaps in care in our society, but also embedded social, cultural, economic inequalities that lead to the higher mortality rates in Black, Latinx, and Asian communities. It's critical our students understand the root causes to make change in their careers and the lives of others. It's important across all fields, whether STEM or in the arts or humanities or business or education or law. The shared global responsibility piece is critical here because we can't do it alone. The challenges are too great and global, so we have to continue our missions together. Ultimately, higher ed has always valued solutions. In times of crisis, we must take an active stance in pursuing partnerships and leverage our shared strengths and experience to address immediate crises and create long-term solutions. And I will stop there.
Gary, that's a very important statement for us all. What UC Davis is committed to doing is inspiring to us all, no matter where we live or the disciplines we practice. So thank you very much for that global commitment. I'd like to turn now to Europe and Louise Fresco from the University of Wageningen. Do you think university roles and responsibilities have been transformed by this crisis, and how do you see your mission going forward? Louise?
Thank you very much. And let me first say what an honor it is to be on this panel with all of you. It's really great that we can have this exchange of ideas. It's so important, I think, that we reach out and hold hands as universities, from the students up all the way to the staff and the directors. So having said that, I'm firmly convinced that universities are more important than ever before. The interesting thing about this crisis, in contrast, for example, to the financial crisis, is that this time science is really in the lead. For the first time, governments are really trying, to a varying degree, but they're still trying to take decisions based on scientific evidence. We see the scientists standing next to politicians to explain this crisis and to explain the management measures that have to be taken. And I think this move towards a more scientific evidence-based approach is very important. And it's something that we should retain, even if this crisis lessens and maybe blows over to some extent, although I don't think it will blow over completely. So there is really a role for science, and hence there is a role for the institutions that build scientific knowledge through research and through education. And perhaps more than ever, in times of such a global crisis, it is really necessary to have a very large contingent of people in the public, even if they don't go for a career as scientists, but who have scientific training, who understand that there is something like a hypothesis that you have to test, that there is something like statistics, which are the basis for decision making. So more than ever, we should stress to governments and to funding agencies and also to young people that this is the time to do a scientific kind of education, to go for scientific studies. Now, when I say science, I don't mean only the natural sciences or the STEM subjects. I think the other thing that this crisis really shows that you have an enormous interdisciplinarity here. We need measures that are socially acceptable, that are equitable, that are for enforcing equality, and are not just science in the strict sense of the word, or just looking at the biology or the virology. This is a time for interdisciplinarity. And hence, I think that that's also very good for our students, so that we show and train them to understand that nearly every problem, and certainly this problem of this global reach, is really something that can only be tackled with a scientific basis in all the disciplines. Now, thirdly, the big advantage, again, of this crisis is that it's very much a global crisis. And it shows us that education and research are international. They are really global, and we should keep that. There are no two different laws of thermodynamics, whether they're in the East or in the West. Science is science. Yes, there are differences, and yes, there are interpretations, and yes, social science certainly differs a little bit more than natural sciences, but the approach to science is very, very much universal. And that means that somebody who has been trained in California or in Lebanon or in the Netherlands or in China can speak with somebody in Tonga or in Latin America, wherever. We can speak to one another. We have a common language and a common understanding. And this commonality is also very important to stress. Hence, I would also like to make an appeal to keep this global approach and not lapse into looking only at regional or even national education. We should try and expose our students more than ever before to education in the global. Make it global, make it universal, make it interdisciplinary and science-based. Thank you very much.
Louise, thank you, and that's such an important way to blend a global perspective and a science-based perspective. It will indeed be important to keep both and keep them global for the future. I want to turn to Fadlo, and your university has been a big hope for more than 150 years in a region that has known practically every crisis that we've ever had to deal with, from biological to virological to political, social, economic, and yet AUB has always been there for the people of Lebanon and the people of the world. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to ask you the same question now. How do you see the roles and responsibility of higher ed now and in the post-crisis era?
Thank you, Allan. Thank you, Gary and Louise. It's not a lot to add except to say that, you know, as we were discussing before we started the panel, the AUB has unfortunately gotten to be a specialist in managing crises. This part of the world, as you pointed out, Allan, has not been free of crises, especially the last 60, 70 years, but arguably going back to the founding of this university, which was shortly after both the Lebanese Civil War and the American Civil War. So as an institution that's had to hold true in difficult times, I think now, from the perspective of global education, it's particularly important that we deal with this phenomenon of tribal epistemology, where information is being evaluated not on the evidence, but on whether it supports your worldview. So it's important to stick to that global point of view, that we can work together to become not only generators of knowledge, but work together to overcome the fear of the other, which is becoming again so prevalent as we're seeing in the worldview. The university here has a very broad reach. We have students from 96 different countries. And with the immediacy of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were faced with moving students off quickly, but with this international collaboration between physicians and researchers that really crossed borders, something we need to keep reminding folks about. So providing a safe, tolerant, and informed space for dialogue and questioning the status quo, something we've been doing since 1947 in creating opportunities for our Palestinian guests, something we've been doing over the last decade in becoming a home for not only Syrian folks displaced from the Syrian conflict, but also from the Iraqi conflict, from Jordan, Turkey, Egypt, and other international centers. So capacity building for leaders of tomorrow, leaders who are open-minded, is a vital function of the university, something, Allan, you've supported through administering the Fulbright scholarships, but to build partnerships between like-minded institutions, such as those represented today, is vital. So we have to continue to facilitate equity and access at all levels to be more and more inclusive at a time where, as Gary pointed out in the beginning, our revenues as institutions that are involved in education and in healthcare and our basic methods of delivering education and healthcare are being challenged. I think that's why we have to get better and better and more inclusive at educating global, responsible, engaged citizen leaders for tomorrow, now more than ever before.
Thank you so very much for that insight and also that commitment. I want to focus a us down just a little bit more on how we're going to pursue internationalization, given the uncertainties ahead of us for the next 3 to 6 months and coming out of this this pandemic crisis. Gary, how is Davis pursuing internationalization, and what do you foresee as some of the key challenges ahead for the commitment to global education for all?
I'll focus on two main challenges today. The first, Allan, is restricted mobility. This includes travel restrictions, health and safety concerns, and government regulations of various kinds. And they are restricting the mobility for teaching, for learning, for research, for partnership building activities as well. The other challenge relates to financial constraints. NAFTA, the National Association of International Educators, released a report estimating a $4.5 billion hit to international education. This is due to canceled study abroad programs and financial support to students, scholars, faculty, and staff. And given these challenges that we face, there's a critical need for more flexible global learning opportunities and programs and services for diverse communities. And they must be accessible and inclusive as well. So at UC Davis, we have a goal known as Global Education for All. It aims to provide 100% of our students with international or intercultural experiences, whether that be on campus, in the region, or across the globe. The pandemic has accelerated this and has made the need for global education for all more acute than ever. In terms of opportunity, technology brings new and accessible opportunities, such as virtual and remote collaborations. They keep us connected with the world, even if travel is restricted or limited. We're adapting in other ways as well, such as offering more courses that include global content. We also have global communities in the dorms, global internships, study abroad programs, and global research in the US and around the world. We are focusing on hybrid or fully online global programs, online global leadership workshops, and more global skill-based certificates. We evaluated all of this with students through surveys and focus groups, and they confirmed that if travel is restricted, they still want to learn new skills and gain new knowledge to be ready for the global job market. We also know our students want to make a difference. So this is why we're piloting a global classroom program that uses the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework. We're partnering with Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico and Shanghai Jiao Tong University in China to bring together technology, expertise, and experience as part of the U21 consortium, of which UC Davis is a member. Now, finally, we're equipping our faculty with the tools to integrate global learning into their courses. This includes the collaborative online international learning method known as POINT. Our Global Affairs Division runs a curriculum enhancement through Global Learning Program for faculty to make courses more global, and we're already seeing some results there. To just name one example, we have design professor Gazda Gonsu Burke in our College of Letters and Sciences, who is working with the Royal College of Art in the UK to integrate COIL and other online global learning elements into her courses. While teaching students about design and about designing wearable products, she's bringing international perspectives that consider both functional and cultural needs, such as designing better functioning and more culturally responsive hospital gowns, as an example. The plan is for the students to ultimately create an international symposium combining these topics of textiles and health in global contexts. So these types of adjustments in creativity and working with international partners through the use of technology eases both the limited mobility and the financial challenges that I mentioned earlier. We were able to leverage classroom learning and online international collaboration to prepare our students for global challenges and opportunities in very cost-effective ways.
Go Davis, and thank you very much, Gary, for that summary. When we turn to Europe and in an institution like the one Louise heads, it's, I'm sure, very important for you to continue the international mobility and research ecosystem that underlies it. I wonder how you foresee pursuing internationalization in the period ahead. Louise?
Thank you very much. Well, I think in terms of the challenges, Gary has explained that very well, logistics and financial. However, we are a very specialized institution, as some or maybe all of you know. So we're very much into the applied life sciences in food and agriculture and environment. And I think that the interest for this field has not decreased. On the contrary, we're also very much in corona or COVID-19 related research, and we see that some of that attracts attention. Now, normally our number of non-Dutch students in the master's level would be, for most specializations, would be up to 50%. So you could say we're very vulnerable. Yet we see new students registering now for the master's classes. So we are optimistic that where travel will be possible, they will certainly continue. Now, as part of our philosophy, we've always had something which we called an international classroom. So there is no student who can graduate from Wageningen if he or she only interacts with students from his or her own nationality. And we've also had for a long time something called blended learning, which is online and on campus. Now, it's very important for us that people who graduate with a degree from Wageningen will really have that on-campus feeling, because it's not just a matter of putting some online courses on and then saying, okay, you know everything. We are creating people, young people, who also need to be creative and need to become rounded individuals. And that requires really a very special interaction with their teachers. So that is still a challenge for us, but we expect that hybrid learning, doing something, maybe coming to Wageningen later and continue on campus will really help them. We have something called a sandwich PhD. I always like the term. And that means that you do some coursework beforehand, you then define your PhD subject, you do the fieldwork in your own country, and then you come back to Wageningen to write it up and defend your PhD. And of course, that is very important, particularly to people in developing countries. And I would like to say that we've created a fund, a philanthropic fund, to extend more possibilities for scholarships for students from developing countries, because we feel it's our mandate, it always has been our mandate, to really reach out also to students who come from countries where financial possibilities are much fewer than they are in some of the European or US OECD countries. And we expect that to continue as soon as any travel bans are lifted. Our buildings are currently being equipped to deal with numbers of students. We will start education, giving special attention to the first year students as of September. And I'm really proud to say that on average, we have about 110 nationalities on our campus on any given day. And I really hope that will continue. So I'm pretty optimistic about the future. Maybe coming months will still be difficult, maybe even the coming year will be difficult, but this desire to learn and the desire to interact on the subjects that we are teaching, I think will not decline. Thank you very much.
I'm also very glad to hear about the continued interest in continued applications. I think we're in Fulbright seeing it across all of the programs globally. The interest in academic mobility has not diminished in any way or any region. I think it will be important for the future. I hope all of you take a look at Louise's bio on the website, because I would really like her book on hamburgers to now become the bestseller on Amazon. And looking forward to the sequel about will we eat hamburgers in a post-COVID world, but it's a very interesting take on not only sandwiches and sandwich PhDs, but on the way food and science interact. So I hope you'll see good results in Amazon, increased applications.
Thank you.
Fadlo, long ago, my PhD advisor realized that I was too narrowly specializing on Asia, and particularly Southeast Asia. And in the year that I finished my PhD, there was one job available at the American University of Beirut. And he thought I ought to apply to teach there because there's no better way to understand differences and similarities between regions than being an international faculty member in another place outside your specialty. And I didn't get the job, but it really was important to my thinking about how to specialize and not specialize to know that AUB is so international, is so open, and is at the heart of a region where there's so many trends, not just crises, but cultures and traditions where there are crossroads. So thank you always for being open to international faculty. And if I apply again, I'm going to let you know. But would you say a word about how this crisis is affecting your drive toward internationalization?
Sure. Well, so first of all, Allan, I heard from a Nobel laureate about 14 years ago that we had turned him down for a job back in the 70s. So that's 2 strikes. Let's hope between you and him we don't do that a 3rd time. So I'm sure if you apply, I'll look into that. So yeah, it's the challenge here is to turn it into a real opportunity. So Lebanon right now is undergoing a perfect storm: a financial crisis, social crisis, political crisis, COVID-19, liquidity, you name it, and the Lebanese pound is devalued dramatically. It's lost 60+% of its buying power. So we're challenged now to hang on to our international faculty. How do we keep that, and how do we keep the key mission? And really, I think the key mission here is about educating open-minded leaders in research and service in patient care and in teaching. I think it's about adapting quickly. Before this crisis hit, we were still thinking that the best model, and I think you've heard this, and you know it very well from Louise and from Gary, is a model of education where you can have experiential learning, distance learning, and still some of the best of the classroom. To do that, I think all of us are recognizing, and COVID-19 is bringing that home, that we need to collaborate better. And whether that's collaborating with institutions in Africa that are much younger than us, like Ashesi, that's a new collaboration through MasterCard, institutions much older than us, like Harvard and Columbia, for example, or Oxford, or with institutions that are about our age, as some of the institutions here are all in the same ballpark. I think these collaborations have to be about admitting what we are good at, what we're not good at. And for example, we've had to come up with a lot of interacting learning strategies and creative tools that we're using for courses. But frankly, one of our biggest strengths is that we have one of the most beautiful campuses in the world in a city that's really a perfect inflection between East and West to some degree. The westernmost point of Asia, really a stone's throw from Europe, but with cultural ties all over. So I think one of the things we have to do is admit that we're used to living in uncertainty and develop not a comfort level, but an understanding with what that uncertainty means for our educational programs. And despite that uncertainty, not let it create an inequality in access and infrastructure. Online learning, some of our students in Africa, in different parts of Asia and in Lebanon, we don't have students from 110 countries, Louise, but we have them from 96. They have different access just to the internet. So how can we overcome that in learning and in assessment? How do we, in a period of instability, not just in our region, but in the world, how do we provide some certainty for students and go back to looking at things such as what's the basic value of the assessment tools we have, exams versus projects? These are the tough questions we're having to ask ourselves in these times, because if we're going to provide value, Allan, we have to first be critical of ourselves, the curricula, the value that we're delivering, and then be open to improving it. And that's, I think, the great advantage, if you will, of this period of uncertainty, is an ability and a necessity to examine what we do and try to see how we can do it better and in a more fair and open way.
Thank you. I think it's a very intriguing idea to begin thinking about whether we should all be offering Uncertainty 101 and uncertainty principles for future decision makers as part of a core curriculum, because it isn't going away. It's one of the principal lessons so far of this crisis, but of many others. And maybe we can and should be much more explicit about teaching what we know about what we don't know, as opposed to teaching only about what we know. Very, very interesting thought. We're getting some questions, and maybe Claire, you could just remind people how to send us in questions, and I'm going to turn to a couple of them in just a moment. But Claire, any guidance on how to do this?
Sure. Thank you to everybody for sending in your questions already. If you do have a question for any of our panelists, just type it into the question box and it will be conveyed to Allan to present to the panelists. Thank you.
So we have one very nice comment for Gary, congratulating you on the new provost who has a strong expertise in epidemiology. And I wonder, Gary and my fellow presidents, should we all have provosts who are experts in epidemiology as a result of this crisis? Gary?
Well, her name is Mary Krogan, by the way, and we couldn't be more pleased to have her joining our leadership team. And Mary is an epidemiologist, and I can't say that I set out in the search to find one, but I'm very pleased to have her expertise in these current times, and she will add quite a bit to our leadership team, not just in her own area of expertise, but in the broader sense of her leadership of our academic enterprise, and we're excited to have her.
I think we're all going to be in need of those services. From a medical perspective, Fadlo, would epidemiology be something now still inside the medical school, or is it something that might be part of a general education requirement for all of your students?
So, that's an intriguing point, Allan. It's part of our Faculty of Health Sciences, our public health school. And at most universities, it's outside the medical school in the School of Public Health. But I do think you make a very valid point that this is a time when everyone should understand something about epidemiology, whether they're assessing disease, whether they're assessing the underlying undercurrents of health, the political undercurrents of health. I think epidemiology is one of those core courses that, along with the classics, my feeling is before long it will be part of all of our core curriculums.
And Louise, where does it fit in your activity and curriculum in the Netherlands?
Well, I think this is a great question, and I would like to argue for something that's even broader than epidemiology, because what we see with this COVID crisis now is that nearly everything is linked in an ecological and epidemiological sense. This virus came from wild animals, probably. It was spread around through markets, through the food chain, and it was spread around through traveling. We are currently looking also at the risks of water contamination, including sewage systems. We're also looking at the risks of secondary contamination through animals living in cities. There is a whole gender issue here because men, particularly for certain types of ethnicities, are much more affected than women. There is a link to all kinds of overall hygiene measures. And so basically what we see with this COVID is that what we need is a far better sense of what I would call epidemiological preparedness, where veterinarians, medical doctors, epidemiologists, but also food specialists need to work together. For example, one statistic from Europe is that the majority of people who are really very ill from COVID-19 and in intensive care are all obese. They're mostly obese men. So there are all kinds of public health patterns, including things we don't know yet, animals, but also, for example, air pollution may be a factor, pollen in the air may be a factor. So my plea would very much be for a better understanding with all of us of the overall integrated, what we call One Health aspect. And I expect One Health to really become very important in our curricula. As it should become part and parcel of an academic education. And I'm working currently to set up some international platforms on having this whole epidemiological and zoonotic disease preparedness in a much better way, so that we have early warning and early action systems. And I think this is a really exciting field for many people to go into, and where international cooperation, and including, if I may say so, also fundamental research, are going to be very important. We should be able to ask the wrong type of questions, the unexpected questions, the questions that we don't know may give an answer, but may be very, very relevant on the virus, but also on all the transmissions. So again, the blessing in disguise, if I may say so, with this crisis, is that it's an extremely challenging and interesting scientific time, and that should also appeal to students.
Thank you. Speaking of students, there's a question for anyone on the panel. It begins with the observation that our students today are very digitally connected, digitally competent, and one wonders how much the human connection is being effaced or eroded by the necessity to do more digital. So how do we reintroduce into academia the global human mutual understanding dimension that really only comes from face-to-face contact and in-person teaching? I wonder if we've gone overboard in being so digital, pivoting so quickly to the crisis, and the question really to anyone is what should we do to restore humanity?
So Gary, I have one thing that troubles me, which is that, if I could, it's that, education is really, and health, one would like to think in this era it should be a right, but people come to colleges to learn how to sift the facts, to sift truth from untruth. And one of the things that you alluded to is the danger of this replacement of the human element with this digitally enhanced learning. It should be digitally enhancing learning. But, it strikes me, I was preparing a graduation speech and looking at something Daniel Bliss, the founder of the university, wrote in 1871, when this was the Syrian Protestant college. And he wrote, "This college is for all conditions and classes of men without regard to color, nationality, race, or religion." Of course, he was reacting as a Yankee, as a Northerner, to something that happened in the American Civil War, and he wanted to establish a college which was inclusive. He didn't include women then, his son, the next president, did. And this university was open to women by the 1920s, some 50 years before the Ivy League schools really all became integrated. The concern here is that now more than ever, with the information overload, you have young folks who are going to believe one side of the argument, and it's our responsibility to allow them to at least have the skill set to examine both sides of the argument. And if we allow them to sink into the digital morass without humanizing it, without some human contact, which we can learn how to overcome the digital divide, then I think we're creating a tremendous risk that they will have a great deal of skill without knowledge and the ability to analyze that. That's the thing that we have to guard against.
Yeah, amen. Let me turn to Gary for a question that may focus on what UC Davis started doing a few years ago, and that's the focus on learning to get an international perspective without actually leaving your home, leaving California or leaving your country. And now it may not be possible for your students to study abroad this fall. What are some of the approaches you're taking to studying and learning about global conditions while remaining at home, but connecting to global communities near your campus?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Allan. Let me also agree with Fadlo's last comments. I think before I answer the question, I'll just, it reminds me of a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois, who said, "The purpose of an education is not to make men and women into doctors, lawyers, and engineers, but the purpose is to make doctors, lawyers, and engineers into men and women." So there's a developmental aspect of the residential learning environment that's missing in this digital age that we have to try to preserve. But to answer the question, we're working on planning that fills both short and long-term needs here, especially in addressing the inequalities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. We're piloting new remote global learning programs and bringing global content into our classrooms, online or in person. In our research activities, we're committed to tackling the world's greatest challenges, many of which are global in nature: climate change, food production, natural resource depletion, and pandemics. And these are all immense challenges, and solving them requires multiple stakeholders collaborating. So we rely on partnerships and opportunities between academia, industry, and government institutions around the world. And we actually have a COVID-19 research group, working group at UC Davis that's been organized by our Office of Research, and it brings together world-renowned experts across disciplines for collaboration, along with providing a directory of researchers working on COVID-19 research and funding opportunities. The researchers are coming together across fields, and fields include medicine and nursing and engineering and agriculture and others. They're implementing projects such as telehealth for low-income Californians, augmented reality video care, and development of low-cost 3D printed ventilators. We are also committed to the One Health approach, as Louise mentioned, at UC Davis. This works at the interface of animals and people and the environment, where we have very strong expertise in each of those areas. Our project, PREDICT, which is led by our One Health Institute in the School of Veterinary Medicine and funded by USAID, was initiated in 2009 with a goal to strengthen health security and global capacity for the detection and discovery of viruses of pandemic potential that can move between animals and people. And they recently received extended funding to provide emergency support for other countries for outbreak response, including technical support for early detection. This project has worked in more than 30 countries throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America to enable zoonotic disease detection capabilities in more than 60 different laboratories. And they also train a One Health workforce of nearly 7,000 cross-trained professionals. In global engagement, we're hosting partnership meetings online for the foreseeable future. This is also a more environmentally sustainable approach, which aligns with our values as one of the most sustainable campuses in the world. We're also hosting online events that engage our partners around the world and various members of our global campus community, such as our Mandela Washington Fellows from Sub-Saharan Africa, in public conversations on important regional and global issues. The universities are really well suited to continue expanding public dialogue, convening leaders to share perspectives from many different vantage points. Having these available online makes the conversations all the more accessible. Overall, I think this is a time for international education professionals and leaders in higher ed to continue advancing creative solutions. And these will help expand our capabilities and ensure that UC Davis will help make our community stronger and our planet safer. We have an opportunity here to reinforce global education with our students at a time when they can see the interconnectedness of the world. So now's the time not to close ourselves in and just be digital, but now's the time to open ourselves up and be global.
Gary, thank you for that and mentioning the importance of collaborations and partnerships. I want to turn to Louise, at least for the first answer to the next question, which is advice on how to establish new collaborations and partnerships with your particular institutions. Are there things that particularly work well for the Netherlands and the research you're doing there, different in Beirut or different at UC Davis? But Louise, do you have a perspective on partnerships with new and existing universities that are looking to reach Europe?
Yeah. Definitely. I think partnerships are obviously more important than they ever were, but it's important to define what you want from a partnership. And I can say, since we are among friends, that we get requests for partnerships with other universities all over the world about every single week. And we are selective, not because we don't love everybody, but because we found that you only can develop partnership if you have a common language and a common framework And really when it's bottom up, when the education staff and the research staff together feel that there is a synergy, that something can be done that could not be done otherwise. And so it's very important to go into partnerships for the long haul and not make them into sort of quick and dirty, easy solutions to a crisis that we have now. We have a number of very good partnerships that I'd like to actually strengthen, including, of course, with UC Davis and including with the so-called A5, the 5 best agriculture universities of the world. And I think we may want to discuss how we can use these partnerships, especially indeed to blend the education in such a way that some of our students could be doing joint courses, but yet sit physically in their own institution. We have been very selective so far in giving out joint degrees with another institution because we did not and do not want to sort of water down our degree because it is so well received in the world. But we need to think, I think, in the widest possible sense about who can be partnered, both in research and in education, and what does it mean. But in any case, I firmly believe that partnerships they're like a marriage, if you want. You're in it for the long haul, for good and for bad. But I also want to come back, maybe, Allan, if you agree, to something you said earlier on how can we get the human and the digital combined in the best possible way, because that plays out in partnerships. Because what you want is to really help students to develop who they are and what their potential is. And in today's world, particularly when you look at scientific publications, is very confusing. There's so much science published. There are also so many scientific data or half truth being used in the public debate. And we really live, I think, in most parts of the world, also in a time of polarization. Maybe some of that polarization has been somewhat leveled off because of the crisis, but polarization is very much something that is not good for science, but it also is something that students need to be able to deal with. When is a piece of reasoning actually scientifically founded? When do you need to go and look for a second or a third or a fourth source? When can we have a dialogue? And what is the basis for the dialogue? And those things are particularly things you have to do with partners from different parts of the world. Because in the end, the way we talk with one another has so much to do with the capacity to listen and the capacity to really read very well and the capacity to formulate. And all those are skills I think people and students can hone so much better in a partnership than they can on their own or even in their own institution. So I'm a great fan of partnerships, but they require building, they require maintenance, they need to be fed, and they need to be cherished, just like a good marriage.
I'm so glad you combined those two topics, and we all appreciate your marriage advice. You have to work at it every day. Fadlo, how about any advice you would have for us on building partnerships with AUB?
I think Louise covered it very well, Allan. You know, we can all sign MOUs, but for us, we look for three things in these strategic partnerships. First of all, it has win-win for both institutions. We spent time, for example, in Ann Arbor with our senior leadership with the University of Michigan folks, and we found we had some common interests, you know, common goals, and that it wasn't one institution gaining and the other giving. So that's key. The other is, I think you have to have a common ethos. You have to really both be committed to the service of humanity by generating leaders and developing science. And unless there is that common ethos, as the engineers would say, it won't be a good impedance fit. And the third really has to be that you have to, I believe, provide experiences that the other has to provide experiences that are meaningful and additive and synergistic to what you're providing on your own campus, whether that's by distance learning or hopefully back to travel. We've got to offer something to kids coming, for example, from Louise or Gary's campuses, or to their faculty members that they don't necessarily have access to in Holland or in California, in the Netherlands or in California. If you can fulfill those three things, then I think you have a win-win. And that's why in some cases we've gone west, we've gone east, we've gone south, we've gone north, but we've tried not to have a million collaborations because then you're just signing memorandums of understanding. And ironically, some of those collaborations are local. For us, we broke what was kind of a bit of a taboo. We're the oldest university in the region. The second oldest is the Jesuit institution, the University Saint Joseph, which was founded 9 years after AUB. There'd never been a formal collaboration, but years ago, we tied that knot, and we find that that local collaboration is also very important in addition to our distant collaborations, because they do some things we don't, and we do some things they don't. So I think really partnerships are built, as you said, like marriages. They're a lifelong exercise in working to make it better.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we only have about 9 minutes left, and we have quite a few questions. I promised to send all of the questions to all of the panelists, and we'll figure out a way as appropriate to maybe post answers on the website. What I'd like to do is raise a question that's come in about faculty, and maybe Gary, Louise, and Fadlo, I could ask you to focus on the faculty question that this person has asked, but then use that as an opportunity to make any of your concluding remarks so that we end promptly at the end of the hour. The faculty question is, how do we make sure that the whole campus community is included in the new conversation online, especially for those faculty who may not have embraced, may not know how to embrace, may not want to embrace new technologies and hybrid models that we're using now and may remain with us long after this crisis is over. So Gary, maybe I could start with you, and you think about how the faculty is being embraced in a new reality, and any concluding observations you'd like to make. Then we'll go to Louise, and then we'll go to Fadlo. Gary?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing to recognize is that our faculty were put under a tremendously stressful situation on having to basically turn on a dime and adjust their pedagogy to the remote format without a lot of time. And so what we tried to do here was to provide as many resources as possible through our Center for Educational Effectiveness for the faculty who may have not had as much experience with this mode of teaching as others may have. So there's a website which we call Keep Teaching, which has all sorts of tools and mechanisms that the faculty can take advantage of and try to and help themselves become a more effective remote instructor. I think that's we've done pretty well at that. There's always room for improvement, certainly, but one of the I think silver linings in all of this has been that some of the faculty members who had heretofore been somewhat reluctant to embrace this mode
Yes.
are now have had an eye-opening experience and are looking for ways to combine both the in-person and the remote methods in their courses in the future. I think that's a positive sign and bodes well for us going forward. It's apparent that we've all been going through this one way or another, no matter what country you're in. So we're going to have to figure out how to continue to thrive. I'll share just two quick examples of how we're bridging the local and global here, and then I'll conclude. First, we've seen global skills and global perspectives in our local community around Davis, and we encourage this. And some of our study abroad students, several staff members, and several of our visiting Hubert Humphrey Fellows, a program administered by IE, by the way, spend time volunteering at the local food bank during the pandemic. And they've offered expertise in volunteer management and geographical information systems to match volunteers with those in need. And the second is we're continuing to connect our campus community with the world through an online series of other virtual events. This allows us to connect with leaders from across fields, across academia, industry, and government to discuss global challenges and opportunities. And I think these things are attractive to our faculty in this new mode of operation, and the power of these partnerships reminds us that global is local and local is global. You know, we are truly interconnected and have a sense of community that has been a result of this crisis.
Gary, thank you very much for that and those observations. We'll turn to Louise.
Thank you. I think that the most striking part of this whole crisis for me has been the incredible versatility and creativity of our staff. It's really amazing how much a crisis actually brings out the best in people. Of course, I'm aware of people getting tired, but if I see what's been happening, how indeed we moved into a new modus of operation within, a couple of days, and everybody's been so incredibly creative in doing things differently, that yes, there is stress, and yes, we must make sure that those who are not so conversant yet in computers, but most people, I should say, Wageningen are really, that they are not left behind. But I find the examples of our creativity very, very encouraging. And just to give you one idea, of course, a lot of our teaching is laboratory work. Now, how do you go online when you want to teach laboratory skills? That's not a matter of just showing something in the lab. You actually have to have students do things. So we have an entire team that constructs 3D laboratory classes where people, students and others can actually participate and work on the outcomes, see models of molecules, and that has never been done in the world. That's really unique. And it's really been a challenge that we didn't have before. The other thing is we have, as an agriculture university, a lot of planting going on now in our summer season. And normally we would have 4, 5, 6 students sitting on a tractor doing things together. So they have designed some very interesting sort of plastic partitions to get people still on that potato planter. So I think we should encourage the creativity where it is. And most people are incredibly creative. Maybe not all of them online, but all of them have ideas to solve these problems. And I would be really very happy, if that might be my last sentence, that we see universities and we offer that opportunity as the place where the best of the creative people that we have around comes to the fore and is being used to solve our global and our local problems. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that inspiring way to think about not only our past, but our future. And concluding our panel, Fadlo?
Sure. So I resonate strongly with what Gary and Louise said. I want to make a point about the fact that the incredible folks, at least on this campus and so many others, had to adapt. Gary talked about the tools we made available to them at UC Davis. We've done it at AUB. I'm sure Louise has done the same in Wageningen, but they still had to learn how to teach in a way that was completely different. And at AUB, watching 800 faculty learn in no time flat, vast majority successfully, how to deliver content and to assess the uptake of that content online is inspiring and impressive. And that's part of the heroics of the COVID-19. But at the end of the day, the reason we all compete for some of the best and brightest faculty members is they're the mentors for the students. They're the folks who stand by them and help them to come up with new ideas, to learn, as I was saying a little while ago, to differentiate truth from non-truth. And if nothing else, if they don't come up with another great humanist or scientific idea, teaching young folks how to differentiate the truth from non-truth is an enormous contribution of faculty members. It's why all of us compete to get these remarkable people to come in. They're dedicated. They work generally for a fraction of what they could in the commercial world. They stick through these difficult times, and they find time in their day and in their evenings to help students come up with ideas. In this period, faculty are feeling very vulnerable, Allan, because universities are saying, well, maybe we can't contribute to your retirement plans because our revenues are down, which they are, or maybe the devaluation of your salary is such that we can't pay you. similar to what we see in Major League Baseball or other sports. But the faculty are much more valuable because they are the lifeblood, the permanent army of academia. We have to look after them because without them, there is no academy. They are the heart of the academy. Without them, the students are listening to tapes and recordings. How we do that in the next few years when the financial world of universities and health systems has been turned upside down will very much determine our legacy and how we are seen by historians. Did we empower the faculty or did we marginalize them? And I hope that we will prove that we empowered them, that we invested in them, and that we supported them in these challenging times, including by sacrificing some of the things that we've gotten comfortable with.
What an inspiring message for all of us who were faculty. I also believe it was in your region we first understood that the truth will set us free. And it's as true 2,000 years ago or more as it is today. And it is also what is going to save us from this pandemic and the next. So may I thank everybody for being on the panel at different time zones and all of our colleagues joining. I'm going to turn the conclusion over to Claire and she'll let you know what's ahead in this series.
Thank you so much, Allan, for moderating, and to all of our panelists. We'd also like to thank the University of California, Davis Office of Global Affairs and Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for your partnership on this series. Please do check out on the screen in front of you the next 4 events in this series that all are welcome to join. Registration is through the UC Davis website on your screen. Thank you so much to everybody and have a wonderful rest of the day.